everyone, welcome to week 4 part B. Quick note, this is the only video for this part and I'm going to try to keep it a little bit short just so that you have extra time this week to prepare for the midterm exam. Alright, so in this video we are going to talk about something called sentinels, something called input validation, and both of these two things, these are things that you can do with loops. So we're not necessarily going to talk about new ways to code, we're just going to talk about how you can sort of use what we've already learned to do something, useful. And then I'll spend a little bit of time talking about the midterm, so you can all prepare for that. Alright, so sentinels. So the idea behind a sentinel is, let's say for example you have a program that has a loop and the loop processes a sequence of values. Let's say for example you are getting user input from the user. Maybe you keep asking the user, hey, give me a name, give me another name, give me another name, and so on for whatever reason. And let's say you don't know how many names you're going to receive from the user. So you're using a loop to keep asking the user for more and more input, but you don't necessarily know how many times you're going to get a piece of information from the user. So that's sort of the scenario that we're talking about here. You're designing a program that uses a loop to process some sequence of values, but you don't necessarily know how many values you're going to have to process. So in that case you can use something called a sentinel. So this is a sentinel just like the general word sentinel, which means sort of a soldier that keeps guard or watch. Sort of the same idea with code. So a sentinel is a special value that marks the end of a sequence of items. So again, use case here, you are using some series sequence of data values, but you don't know how many you're going to get. So something that you can do to sort of solve that issue, to know when to stop asking for more, when to stop running your loop, is to have some sort of value that is sort of like a flag that marks, okay, once you hit this value, that's the end, and you can stop asking for more. So with sentinels, they have to be distinctive enough that it will not be mistaken as a regular value in the sequence. So what I mean by that is, let's go back to this example I was talking about before. For whatever reason you're writing a program that asks the user for a bunch of names, just over and over repeatedly. And but again, you don't know how many names you're going to ask for, so something you could do is you could use a sentinel, and a good sentinel for this use case might be an empty string, for example, right? Because names are going to be inputted as strings. If the user types in nothing, they just press enter, that could be the sentinel. It's distinctive enough from what would be a regular value in the sequence, which would be, someone's name, that, Python will be able to check and see if it's that other thing. You could also maybe use the string that has the word done in it. Maybe check and see if the user types in done, or if they type in 0. It just has to be a distinct value. Alright, so here's an example. I recommend at this point pausing this video and typing up this code, and when you're ready, come back. So I've already gone ahead and typed up this code as well. So this is where the sentinel is. So again, the idea behind a sentinel is you're going to use some sort of loop. Generally you use a while loop, and you keep getting more values until there's a new value that you hit that doesn't work for the sequence. So in this example, the sentinel is 0. So basically this loop is going to keep running as long as this value that you're asking from the user is not 0. So that's sort of the idea behind how sentinels work. You have a while loop, and whatever variable is sort of keeping track of the new piece of data in your series of data, whatever variable is keeping track of that, you're checking to see if that variable does not equal the sentinel. If it doesn't equal the sentinel, you want to keep running the loop. And then the way it works is the second that this value does equal this sentinel, in this case it's 0, then this loop is going to stop. So again, the idea here is you keep asking for input over and over for more numbers. Let's go ahead and run this. Keep asking for input. It says enter a number. How about 3? How about 5? You know, and so on. And it'll keep asking for numbers, as many numbers as you want, until the user inputs the sentinel. In this case, it's 0, and then it'll stop. In this case, what it's doing here is it's summing up all of the numbers that we entered, starting with a total set to 0, a little message that says, hey, at any time enter 0 to stop. So this is good practice. If you're using some sort of sentinel loop like this, then tell the user what they have to do to stop the program from running. You get an input. This is kind of the weird part. This input line, you have to ask for it twice. So you have to ask for it at the beginning before you even hit the while loop, because you need to have some sort of value for this variable before you even get to here. And then every time this while loop runs, you want to ask it again. And that's how you'll get, a new value each time it runs. And then as this while loop is running, each time it's checking. If the value is equal to 0, we're going to stop this while loop and then go ahead and print the total. If the value is not 0, we'll keep asking for more numbers. So that's sort of the idea behind sentinels. Again, you have a sequence of values. You don't know how many values you're going to get, so you use a while loop, and you basically say while the value that you're getting is not equal to some sentinel, some sort of distinct value that can mark the end of a sequence, keep asking for more values or keep processing more values. Something to note about sentinels: sentinels are not a type. It's just a special name for a value. So I know it's a little bit confusing because we use types to categorize values, but sentinels can be of any type. So in this example here, a sentinel here is 0, the integer 0, but you can have your sentinel be any type that you want. Another thing that you could do, you could check to see if it's the empty string, right? If the user types in nothing, then stop processing data. So it's sort of up to you as a programmer to determine what sentinel makes sense for your program. And again, the rule is it just has to be distinctive enough from what would be a real value that you're processing. Alright, so that's sentinels. If you do have any questions about sentinels, please do let me know. Post the discussion forums or send me an email. Now let's talk about one other loop trick that you can use. So input validation. This is super important when you are using, real world data. So you can actually use loops to make sure that the data that you get from input statements actually makes sense for the application. So again, this is really important for real-world applications, so you can get rid of any bad data. Basically, any data that doesn't actually make sense for what you're asking the user. So let's talk about what I mean by this. So basically, you have an input statement. Let's say it's an input statement that says, enter a number that's greater than 10. Now, the user, if they're a good user, they'll read the message and they'll give you a number, that is greater than 10. But what if they didn't read the message? Or what if they're just, trying to break your program? Maybe they'll enter a number that's less than 10, for example. So ideas with input validation is you're going to check and see if the data that you got from the input makes sense for what you want your program to be asking for. So if the data doesn't make sense, your program should get rid of that data and then prompt the user with the same question again. Be like, hey, give me another number. You keep asking the user for data until you get data that does make sense for your use case. So again, you can use a while loop to do this. You can use a while loop to perform this input validation, this sort of check to make sure that whatever the user types in at the input line makes sense for what you're asking for them. Alright, so here's an example here. So I recommend going ahead, typing up this code, and then pausing the video, coming back when you are ready to talk about it. So looking at this code here, there's a couple things that's going on. We see this sort of same thing where you ask for input twice again. So you ask for input at the very beginning, say enter a test score, right? So we're assuming the user is going to type in some number between 0 and 100, for example. So this input validation, this is checking to see, to make sure that the score is not less than 0, basically. So what's happening here is you ask for input from the user inputs some test score, and then you hit this while loop. This while loop says, while the score is less than 0, so with input validation, you want your condition to be the thing that is wrong. So while it's wrong, you print out, an error message saying, hey, this doesn't make sense for my program. In this case, error, the score shouldn't be negative. And then again, inside the while loop, you ask the user again the same input. And the idea is this while loop will keep asking for that input until the score is not less than 0. So again, you're checking while it's wrong, keep asking for input again. And then when it's correct, it will stop running this loop. So if we go ahead and run this, again, so the idea is here, if you enter a test score that makes sense, it works. There's nothing else that's happening. Let's go ahead and run it again and enter a test score that doesn't make sense. Let's say -90. So in this case, it shouldn't make sense, right? Because we're saying, hey, give me a test score. User's inputting -90. Well, that doesn't make sense as a test score, unless, I don't even know how you could get that on a test. But at this point, if I go ahead and enter that, then the code runs and says, it does this check, it sees that this is true. While it's wrong, it's going to print this error message. So it's checking, all right, it's less than 0, so I'm going to print this error message, and you can see it's asking me for a test score again. So let's now do, +60. This case will work, right, because it's not a negative number. So that's it. So a question I have for you then is, what advantage does this have over just using an if statement? Why are we using a while loop rather than just an if statement, right? Because an if statement could also kind of do the same thing, right? It can check and see, if the score is less than 0, print this error message, ask for input again. So why would this be better than an if statement? Go ahead and pause the video if you need to think about it. So the reason why this while loop is superior to just using an if statement for input validation, let's go ahead and change this to an if, just for demonstration purposes. All right, so we'll run it. All right, I'll enter a test score, -90. Says the score can't be negative. All right, how about a positive one? Cool, that works fine. Let's try running it again. All right, enter test score, -90 again. Now, again, this is when I have an if that's checking it. So let's enter another negative test score. Let's say I'm just really bad at reading directions, right? And I enter another negative test score. See, the problem is with an if, it's only going to check to see if it's wrong once. So the cool thing about trying this instead with a while, let's go ahead and run this now. With a while loop, it will keep asking you to re-enter it as many times as you enter a negative score. So again, this is the advantage of using a while loop rather than an if. If you use an if, it's only going to check and see if it's wrong once. So if the user is really bad at reading directions, it won't, check the second time they enter something wrong. With a while loop, it will keep checking until you give it something that does make sense for your input validation. So do make sure when you are doing input validation for this class and just in general in programming, use while loops instead of ifs for this specific reason. Alright, again, that said, if you have any questions about this, feel free to post the discussion forum or send me an email.